to talk about the short-term incentive program. In addition to the regulars, Garrett, DeFi Advisor, and WenMoon, we also have Adamus from Castle Corp. We have Louis from, Louis, where are you from again? I can't hear you. I think you're on mute.
Perennial.
From Perennial. And we also got AJ with some GMX logo here in the background.
Yeah, that's it. I'm from the Perennial core team as well with Louis.
Oh, amazing. Yeah. So it's good to have you guys on. And we might have some other people dropping in here as we go forward with the live stream, but we'll dive right in. So we have just gotten to the end of the application period for the first round of the Arbitrum short-term incentive program. I believe we had roughly 100 projects that applied for over 120 million ARB, with 50 million ARB to be distributed over 2 rounds. So what were you guys' initial thoughts on the application period? Do you think it went in line with what you had expected with this grant round? Were there any outliers of applications that you saw? And we can let's see who wants to start. Either AJ or Adam, Mr. Louis, you want to take it and go ahead?
Yeah, I think the kind of window they laid out was pretty straightforward. I think maybe things moved a little faster than a lot of teams expected, and you saw that in quite a few ineligible submissions. People trying to maybe backstop their own operating costs, or incentivize some long-term strategies or some builders on their platforms, for example. So it wasn't exactly clear to everyone that this was just a 3-month short-term incentive program to kind of boost metrics on Arbitrum and kind of collect data about how grants should be spent within the ecosystem. But I think through all the support of the guys on the forums and helping run the ops on the DAO side, most people kind of adjusted their proposals to get back within scope again.
So I do have a couple of questions about that. Like when we look at the proposals, there was a lot of top-heavy incumbent requests, like with GMX, and also some of the other bigger protocols like Lido, requesting several million ARB for these incentives. But then you also have a lot of mid-tier to very small projects that were also requesting as well too. So how do you think the breakdown is going to happen here with the ARB distribution?
Yeah, it seems like naturally that I guess the kingmakers on Arbitrum are going to get rewarded as they should. I think what's unclear is where does the middle ground get sorted out, because it's sort of look like GMX is sort of earned their roses, and the DAO should be willing to give it to them, and Treasure and others who have really I guess drove the ecosystem forward. But then I think there's a lot of proposals that have been made by teams that have either incentivized their own volume or TVL on the platform. How do you compare that to a protocol who's just starting out and has unincentivized volume? And it's just a bit of a knee-jerk reaction is one thing. I'm not saying there shouldn't be ARB incentives, but it's also just okay, there's been TVL that's sort of siphoned away into things like base and optimism, and I guess the knee-jerk reaction is just to yep, let's incentivize things and just kick off that flywheel. So yeah, it doesn't feel like it's the most strategic rollout, but at the end of the day, I'm glad Arbitrum is willing to compete on that front.
And so if you look at it, right, there's the guys who proposed this is Stable Labs, I think, Stable something. These guys have put down some sort of not requirements, but frameworks in terms of what size everybody should be asking for. And these frameworks mainly are revolved around 2 metrics, which is TVL and volume that the projects have been doing. So if you've done higher TVL, if you have higher TVL, or if you're a trading platform and you've done higher volume, you should be able to ask for more incentives. Now, like the idea of whether that's a smart strategy or not, obviously is yet to be determined. But the point is, it is just a framework, right? And at the end of the day, this is unlike the foundation. This is a DAO proposal, right? So the DAO at the end of the day has full autonomy to be able to say, actually, you know what, GMX deserves less, the GMX deserves more, for whatever reason they choose, right? So like what's going to be interesting to me is going to be watching what actually, you have all these thousands of different holders of ARB, thousands of different delegates. What is going to be the deciding factor for each of them coming together and really deciding which projects actually deserve incentives and how much do they deserve? And obviously we have an overcommitment already, right? We have 120 million ask with only 50 million available, and obviously that's to be expected
over 2 rounds as well too.
Yeah, and that just means that, you know, what actually who are we actually going to give these incentives to, and it's going to be interesting to watch really what the DAO decides.
Is there any do you have any like thumb, or does anyone have a thumb on the kind of political will of what the Arbitrum community is to fund, and what they might fund in the mid tier? We already know that GMX is the lifeblood. They probably might be on the high end still, but like what are some of the other projects that are standouts kind of in the middle tier?
Maybe Autonomist might have a better grasp on this.
Yeah, I mean, what we saw is pretty much all the biggest requests came from perps, really. I mean, that's because perps are generally like the lifeblood of Arbitrum. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. We do see it, you know, as soon as perps get volume and generate fees, we see those fees like flow through the entire ecosystem into secondary vault products and into further yields around. So incentivizing perps is probably a good thing, but as you said, it's about getting that number right. Obviously, GMX asking for 28% of the 50 million is a huge amount, but you would get a lot of GMX proponents arguing that that is completely warranted based on, you know, their volumes, their fees, their TVL that they achieved with V1, and now they're just trying to bootstrap V2 in a similar vein. You've then got their competitors in Mux and Gains asking for, although lower, still huge amounts. So it's about, you know, up to the delegates to figure out what is reasonable. Whether GMX, who are trying to put like a new innovative product in their V2, incentivize that and bootstrap their V2, versus, you know, Mux, which is still operating on a V1 basis, trying to incentivize their V1 LP still, along with their aggregator, for example. So there's many different ways. More on the middle level, you have big incumbents coming in like Lido, like Aave, who maybe haven't been that close to Arbitrum, but still think they deserve like quite a big share of the pie. To be fair, both of those applications, I believe, you know, they applied for 12-month grants, so they didn't even, you know, read the grant properly and really think about what they were doing. Maybe they just cut and paste from, you know, every other chain they go and try and harvest grants from. And then probably lower down, you've got like Arbitrum native guys like Radiant, Camelot Jones, and the rest, who you probably will see the community back. Whether or not they get given the amount they've asked for is another question. And you've also got Radiant, for example, was one flagged for us in that 70% of their incentives are going to DLP, which is essentially a Radiant LP. So you'll get probably the community looking at things like that and thinking, you know, I don't want to just pump your token. I want to see a waterfall and trickle down of incentives through not just the protocol, but how does that protocol then touch other protocols and affect the wider ecosystem?
Yeah, especially with the the perps right now. I mean, with volatility as low as it is, I mean, the fees were already kind of diminished. So I don't know. Maybe we get an increase in volatility as well with the addition of these incentives that drive a lot more trading volume into Arbitrum. I guess that would be the hope. And then you have all these like second order protocols that are built on top that would benefit from this.
Yeah, with regard to perps, do you think it should be a consideration of the delegates whether it's like taker versus LP incentives within a perps platform? Because I guess what we've seen with OP incentives on Optimism is that protocols like Cuenta, Polynomial, they've basically just had a heap of OP rewards for just like trader rebates and things like that.
Mhm.
And I guess if you like sort of run in those circles, you know that it's heavily wash traded. Like even on low volatility days, you know, someone could pull out like $100 million day, which is sort of crazy. Like it's obviously not retail flow. So I think that is going to be, I mean, there's probably an interesting forum post in that. Like, is that the activity that Arbitrum really wants?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think the big thing to watch will be, like you guys mentioned, like how GMX compares to its rivals, right? And what sort of like political like backlash there might be, like, or if there's any sort of issues raised by some of the smaller ones saying like GMX got outsized rewards. Obviously, they have more pull within the community. Like we didn't really get funded at all. Look at all the, you know, you guys are essentially like picking GMX to be the winner out of this when it should be like well distributed across these perp platforms. But there is a bunch of perp platforms on there. That is, you know, like one of the bigger trends. Is there anything outside of the perps that I know there was some bridges that were getting funded as well too. Like, is there anything non-DeFi in these grants?
There's a couple of gaming projects and a couple of gambling projects, but I think above of that, there's maybe you know, more community-led quest stuff from Galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
But really, yeah, the bulk of it is DeFi, and I think we kind of saw that even in the specs for like how much, you know, you should be requesting. It was all pretty TVL based, and I think we saw a comment from Treasure DAO, you know, Magic, saying like even the spec wasn't necessarily fit for purpose, but they've not come through with a proposal of any sort. But I think a couple games they're backing are here,
Yeah.
but they're like tiny games with like tiny market caps.
So I guess like if you look at it, this will be sort of like meta defining, where in the sense that the Arbitrum Foundation will learn, like, or at least whomever's proposing these will learn, you know, what the advantages and disadvantages of their rule set that they provided for going into the next proposal. Are these short-term incentive programs? Is it going to be like a longer term incentive distribution mechanism? Like, are they going to be able to distribute 50 million ARB every 6 months for the next, I don't know, 10 years or something like that? Or will they kind of like pivot, maybe do smaller ones after this? Do you have any idea on what the like the next few rounds will be?
I think it'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, I think, you know, for the beginning of the vote, I think it was at 25 million, looked like it was the clear winner, and then it kind of bumped back up. But I mean, they asked for 75 million in the beginning, and I don't think that was too palatable. And like, you know, you can kind of see by the end of it, I think everyone kind of understood that, you know, this is, you know, a trading incentives thing. You know, we're looking at what Optimism's doing and other protocol, other blockchains. And they were like, we want some of that action too. And I think you kind of see it, right? Like in the outline, it's really based kind of like, you know, towards perps, or biased towards perps, in the sense that, you know, like, you know, trading volume and TVL is kind of that metric, and everyone in that ecosystem. So, you know, I think it remains to be seen how effective this is. I think it'd be interesting to see if there was time between seasons. So I'm sure, you know, once we get to January, people are going to be wondering, you know, what's next? You know, can we keep this going? But it'll be interesting to see if this can kickstart something, or if the community decides to jump straight into backing up the rewards again and keeping the kind of the tokens flowing. Either way, I think it'll be interesting to see what the community decides on that second vote.
Yeah, because the metrics have shown that Arbitrum's really lost a lot of TVL to OP and base over the past 3 months. With base essentially, or Coinbase essentially teasing out a token, like potentially, like we may or may not, but we may not launch a token. I think that's driving a lot of TVL over there. People say like, okay, let's just go do stuff on base, and maybe there'll be some reward incentive in the future, as well as the friend tech as well too, really dominating the narrative at the moment. I think the trading aspect, again, like in these kind of like bear market, low volatility times where there's just not a lot of users across the entire ecosystem, you're really relying on a bunch of whales to kind of bring TVL back, and hopefully not be mercenary at the end of the day, which I think is the biggest issue. And like you guys are saying, like the big issue is that can these incentive programs be designed so that like downstream protocols of the major players like GMX or whomever are building on top of perf platforms can get significant TVL and size locked in during these next 3 months.
So that's a really interesting point, right? Because nowhere in the STIP proposal itself was any real effort made to make this non-mercenary, right? Like essentially they've said, please dump these tokens as hard as you possibly can and do it as fast as you possibly can, because you only have 3 months to do it, right? It's from a protocol perspective, once you get these, you have this essential quota, right? You have to spend this money. And then, like most protocols themselves are not taking any strides to make that non-mercenary either, right? Again, it's one of those things where, I think a lot of protocols are thinking, well, if Arbitrum doesn't care, or if the proposal makers don't care, then why should we care to make them not immediately dumped, right? But there are a few protocols like Umami, right? Like what we're doing is trying to give these incentives in a way that is going to be positive to Arbitrum's ecosystem rather than like immediately dumped. And the way that we're doing that is making sure that anybody who does want to dump the tokens, they have to pair and lock essentially some Arbitrum with the protocol to actually to get those in the first place, right? So if you want to farm, you can farm, but basically once you farmed, you've got to lock some Arbitrum tokens, and that kind of aligns incentives, right? So if you're locked for 4 months with some Arb, you're already, in a position where you're long Arb, you're aligned with Arbitrum. So yeah, it makes it harder to dump those incentives. It makes it slower to dump those incentives, and even if and obviously in a perfect case, because you are aligned, hopefully the people that are getting these tokens are also want them, right? Also want more voting power in Arbitrum or whatever. But yeah, apart from us and apart from Dolomite, I don't think I've seen another proposal trying to do any of that. And what I really wish is that, sure, right, like this proposal, this whole STIP thing was made without this in mind. But after seeing, hopefully, like if we do get our incentives and if this does function well to serve as, wow, actually, this was a better way to give incentives rather than just letting people dump them, maybe we'll see on a STIP level this sort of idea being used where like protocols that want to get these grants, they need to show some way that they're going to be positive to Arbitrum as well, and not just be immediately dumped into mercenary hands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just want to say, yeah, props to firstly Dolomite for thinking of that mechanism, and for Umami following on. I just want to add that this short-term program, like it's meant to be like a learning process and a learning curve for us. So as you say, like we'll see who had the best proposal, who thought about their incentive mechanisms and reducing sell pressure on ARB properly. as Louis said, I think there will be, a time afterwards where there will be a dead zone with no incentives carrying on, and we can really look at the after effects of some of these. Which ones were mercenary capital that just completely flee, and which ones kind of start retaining those users still. And then from there, we can look at which protocol was successful and why. It might not just be because of their product, but because of other mechanisms they laid on top as well. So I think that's going to be really important. The 3 months 50 mil might sound like a lot in a short period of time, but I mean it's really not compared to what the treasury has. We could do a lot of these out, spanning 20 plus years if we wanted to, so that's not the problem. It's about putting the analysis in place afterwards, and for delegates to be as educated as possible as to where incentives should flow and for what reasons.
It's funny. I think I think of Curve in this situation where, they have a VE social system that effectively distributes their governance token to the most deserving liquidity pools. But in this sense, I mean, we almost have a similar VE system where the DAO is essentially distributing tokens to the most deserving protocols at the time. And it might be actually a good model for the long term where you have continuous incentivization of protocols for, I don't know, 20, 30, or however long you can make it sustainable, maybe infinitely sustainable. But the projects are able to essentially get new gauge voting every couple of weeks or months to be able to bring new money into the protocol.
I think I think this will. I'm sorry.
It's a little bit more of an ordeal, right? There's a little bit more of a process with Curve. There's a lot of bribing. I hope not to see any bribing anytime soon on Arbitrum grants, but who knows, right? This is the DAOs. But yeah, it's I'm sure next time again, one of the big considerations that's going to come into play with the next grants, especially for people who already got the grants, is okay, you got however much you got, and how did that actually produce any results, right? Mm-hmm. That's where this trial and error of this is going to come into play, because the ones that do have this sort of mercenary capital and then it just flees in that down period, I'm sure the DAO is going to be looking at those protocols with a bit of disgust and saying, wait a second, we gave you this many million last time, and where the fuck is it now, right?
Yeah. Speaking of the bribes, I actually saw a bunch of projects proposing to do token matching. So there were several that said, okay, you're going to give us 500,000 ARB. Okay, in addition to that, we're going to put up X number of our tokens to also incentivize as well too. I wonder if that becomes the de facto standard as well too, where the Arbitrum, at least if there can be more token emissions tied to whatever sort of grant that's being passed out, that is almost like a matching program.
Grant matching, I think, is a smart. Sorry, let me quickly just say, I think grant matching is a smart way for protocols who aren't, we talked about protocols who aren't dedicated to Arbitrum. As Atomus put it, there are some that kind of apply to grants on every single chain. So what really keeps them here on Arbitrum? What is their commitment? And I think grant matching is a way to show that. But other than that, especially if you're an Arbitrum native protocol, there are a ton of Arbitrum native protocols that don't even have a token yet, right? And that was a big problem with the airdrop. A ton of protocols didn't get the airdrop because they had no tokens, so they weren't decentralized enough and therefore couldn't get the airdrop. That's one thing that we don't want to see, I think, with the way the grants are given out, right? I think the grant matching works perfectly for projects that aren't dedicated to Arbitrum to show dedication, but other than that, I think it's supposed to be careful around that.
Mm-hmm.
But go ahead, Louis.
Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say the same point in that it's a bit hard for some protocols who don't have a token to be able to kind of match alongside, and I feel like there's a lot of community that is brought with the token in some aspects. Like you look at kind of like GMX and the major kind of perps and different DeFi protocols. Having a token makes community relatively sticky. You know, instead of it just being kind of like an application that you use, it becomes kind of like a community that you're involved in, that you have a stake in, and you have a say in as well. And so like I think that there's kind of a difference between those with and those without, and that it's kind of a hard line to kind of figure out, you know, is who's more deserving, who should be able to get these grants when, you know, at all of these different protocols are in different parts of their life cycle. You know, some are quite nascent, some are quite mature, and how do you weigh those against each other? You know, is something the next GMX, or is it kind of, you know, not going to be something in, you know, 3-5 years? So yeah, I think it's interesting to kind of juxtapose those two kind of different types of protocols and how they're going to fare in the vote.
Mm-hmm. Should the DAO / foundation or be using these grants as a way to kind of like lock in projects to the Arbitrum ecosystem? You know, we haven't seen anything like non-competes to say like, okay, you're going to get these incentives, and for the life of the incentives, we don't want you to deploy on OP or base. We want you to stay here. We'll give you all the brand support that you need, but we don't want you to be as like dynamic and cross-chain as you could be.
I think it's interesting to see stuff like that be added in maybe in the next round. Like I think if you look at the proposal as a whole, I think it's quite interesting. You know, if you look at it as like a test, a 50 million ARB test, I think it would be interesting to see what gets added in and what gets taken out in the next ones. I think the hard focus on streaming incentives and making sure that you've got like a contract-based mechanism to distribute is quite limiting in some aspects, and there might be other more creative things that can be done and can bring a lot more value. But I think you know, as a first test, this is, you know, I think, you know, while some people might be unhappy, some people might be very happy, I think it's a good place to start. You know, you had to start somewhere, and if it was that committee for the next, you know, 6 months about what the optimal program is, then we wouldn't have any data to look at. So you know,
yeah,
as it is, I think it's a good thing, but maybe, you know, we'll see the parameters change over time.
Yeah, and so coming back to like the projects themselves, like what were some of the standout ones that you guys all saw from the first round of applications? I know WenMoon, you mentioned Dolomite and how they were setting up things. Obviously, we'll say that Umami is also very interesting as well too.
Umami, I think, was the best one.
Obviously,
and then second is Perennial, but
obviously.
I mean, maybe you guys could like walk through your structuring on how you guys approach the application, and you know, some of the things that you thought about to set yourself apart.
From our perspective, or from like looking at other proposals perspective?
Well, I mean, just in the whole, right? I mean, maybe like WenMoon, you can go, and then Lou and AJ, you could talk about Perennial as well too. Just about like the grant writing process, like what went into your thinking about like how the liquidity should be set up. Maybe you can talk about the program that's or the application, or like the execution that's going to happen once the grants are passed.
So I can talk very quickly about like what goes through my mind when I'm writing this is essentially, as an Arbitrum holder, what are the things that I care about, right? And for me, it's that these 50 million ARB that we're giving out is an investment, right? And should be treated as such. Like, you expect to give these 50 million out, and obviously maybe this one is going to be like the litmus test, and maybe the next ones are going to be more refined. But the idea is, as a whole, you give out 50 million and you expect more than 50 million in value back, right, to the Arbitrum ecosystem. And how do you retain that? So from our perspective at Umami, we're like focusing on like, number one, statistics. So, you know, user data in terms of deposits, in terms of revenues, all this kind of stuff, but also in terms of the protocol as a whole, right? And I think for us, one of the key things that I want to focus on, and I'll be focusing on this in our pitch soon, is that given the nature of our protocol, right, the TVL that we attract, maybe it's obviously got to be less than anything we're built upon, right? We can only ever have as much TVL as GMX has or lower, right? Like if we're built on top of GMX, because every single dollar of TVL flows through us into GMX, right? And that means that, yeah, even though we might have lower TVL, it just means that every single dollar of TVL is going to be way more sticky because of the nature of what we are building, right? And the same goes for like different projects like Jones and stuff. And so like, yeah, we kind of focus on that. But there's also another part, which is in terms of from a perspective of who should Arbitrum really back, right? Who should they be backing? I think one of the things for us is, and it's definitely a thing that I consider is just as we were speaking about before, dedication to Arbitrum, right? And with us, we've been around since the very second month that Arbitrum was created, right? Umami is one of the oldest and most OG protocols, and we haven't moved to any other chain, right? The entire time we've been dedicated to Arbitrum. So it's another one of the things that we want to focus on. And then obviously the final thing being the novel incentivization mechanism that we're using, that isn't just a win-win for us, but also a win-win for Arbitrum. And yeah.
What about you guys at Perennial?
Yeah, so I think the way that we approached it was we're kind of in an interesting spot at Perennial. Like we have very soon, I think counted probably in hours more than anything, we have the next version of our protocol launching. So this was kind of almost a amazing coincidence that this incentives program kind of happened as it is. But you know, we're looking to kind of continue in the success that we had. You know, we originally launched on Ethereum. But you know, after 2 months or so, we moved over to Arbitrum, and that's where we really saw success. And so we kind of want to continue what we did in V1 and try and use these incentives to kind of kickstart momentum on our markets, but also then look to direct towards more novel things. You know, you have the standard, you know, BTC, ETH, all these different markets that people normally trade, but you know, looking at the ecosystem that Arbitrum has kind of supported. You know, we have different types of oracles, coming online. We have RWA stuff that's happening, and we want to see if we can tune these incentives to be able to kind of kickstart and see if there's a healthy market that can be supported on Arbitrum for those types of things. So I think we're interested to see that process. We're interested to tune over those kind of like bi-week periods to see how we can kind of begin to create a healthy ecosystem in terms of markets, and then also look to see how we can make things more sticky. So looking for rewards in terms of like weighing rewards for LPs who continue to use the platform and don't kind of move around like mercenary capital, things like that. And then kind of like do a review back and look and see, what do we need to tweak if there's another one of these proposals, and kind of go from there. One other thing as well is we want to see if we can kind of create markets or support markets that will be useful for other protocols to build on top of. You've got an options ecosystem being built. You've got interest rate swaps with Pendle. All of these protocols need liquidity. They need things to be built on top of. And so if we can help bootstrap that and we can kind of build those markets out for them, I think that will be a multiplier for what these rewards are. In terms of the Arbitrum ecosystem as a whole. And so we're looking to kind of see if we can prove out, V2. We're looking to see if we can build out, a bit more of an ecosystem and hopefully support new and novel markets in the Arbitrum space.
So, and you said your V2 or like V2 launch or whatever next edition of the product is going to be tied in with the short-term incentive program.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of coincided like that. We're pretty excited. Hopefully we'll be able to get the vote through. But if not, we're excited to bring kind of V2 onto Arbitrum, in the next couple of days. So we're excited to see how that goes. And it differs a lot from some of the other platforms. It should be quite exciting.
Yeah, we hit basically the grant threshold with our V1, which was like unincentivized. So we like sort of made our requirements there, and then we think our V2 is basically like orders of magnitude more capital efficient and the original proposal, like the TLDR, is like just 750k ARB, sort of split between makers and taker strategies. But are working with teams like Gauntlet, as Louis said, to like fine tune how that's distributed. And ultimately, like, we view it as the first step in terms of bootstrapping liquidity so that there can be an ecosystem built on Perennial. So we've already got sort of one of the big DEX aggregators who's going to be launching derivatives via Perennial after we launch V2, and sort of a host of like structured product integrations that we're excited to ship. So yeah, hopefully this is like the first of many steps with Arbitrum DAO in building out an ecosystem on Perennial.
Yeah. And Adamus, as a like capital allocator, like how are you thinking about this going into the voting round? Like, are you already deploying into certain positions, or how has the end of the application period affected your overall portfolio?
Well, I must say I'm much more wearing my governance delegate hat than allocator these days. So obviously there will be people within our group trying to find the alpha and who's got the smallest market cap to grant requests and stuff like that. For me, I'm much more focused on the kind of governing principles we have around who we are going to allocate our votes to. And every delegate's going to have a different opinion. It's a massively subjective thing. For us, that is prioritizing Arbitrum native protocols, not just people that launched there, but people who have been there since day one. They've committed to the chain and its stability and its longevity over a good period of time. Next is probably more about the grant itself. We want to see grants with goals that not just like, I want to see if my product has product market fit. If you give me some incentives, but there should be second order waves happening from those incentives that you're putting through your product, which affect the wider ecosystem and then other projects around them, to really amplify impact across the chain. Next is probably more about innovation. We've only got 50 mil, and the ask is well over 100 mil. So we want to favor teams that are innovative, that are building unique products that haven't been seen before necessarily. This is the driving force of crypto. This is where we want to align, like this ARB that's here. Maybe it's fair if everyone gets a small slice of the pie, but is there a reason we should incentivize another DEX that is using a third party concentrated liquidity provider, for example, versus it's good that we've got these two teams on here building products that in a different way to other people are building them, and offering something that we haven't seen yet, and that it's good to throw an incentive out and test out if it sticks or not. And then we want to see the protocols have been effective in the past, and that, as I said just a minute ago, they're not just searching for product market fit here with their ARB, and if they are searching for product market fit with incentives, why aren't they using their own tokens, or why aren't they matching tokens for that, for example? And then finally, Arbitrum is a chain of collaboration, so we want to see these teams be open to collaborating with others, both on a product level, but also on a social level as well. And that's why Arbitrum's come so far in this period of time since September 2021, 2 years on now. And it just shows that we've come this far because teams have been scratching each other's backs constantly, without the need for any incentives.
Yeah, so I want to talk about the milestones that you kind of touched on. I know that some projects didn't provide any milestones for, say, okay, we're just going to take, we're requesting like 1 million ARB, but we only need 250,000 up front. And then based on these milestones, we're going to do XYZ, then we'll receive more ARB. I know that Frax, I believe, requested like 800,000, and then there's like another 700,000 on the back end once they doubled their TVL liquidity, or TVL or liquidity on chain. I wonder if that's the defining change that we'll see within the next round, to say that we don't want to just give the full allocation now. We want to see much more objective oriented distributions to say like, okay, like, GMX, you want to get 12 million, go do XYZ, like, bring GLP liquidity up, also increase, trading volumes by this much, like show growth, so that we can have like clear KPIs to say like, okay, we should allocate more money here. And that's probably going to be seen after the end of these first season.
Well, yeah, I'm unsure really, because I mean the milestones that some people put in were obviously a positive thing to see they thought about, but they actually had to remove those milestones to get their proposals through. So they're using a streaming process now, yeah. So at any point, if the DAO is unhappy with how they're going about distributing those ARB, or if the results are bad, the DAO can actually just turn off the tap whenever.
Right, but will there be political will to do that? I mean, like that, like once, if there's a 600,000 ARB stream that's going out and it requires a certain voting level from the DAO, I wonder if that's even possible to get after the kind of big omnibus votes go through.
I think the way it was phrased in the initial proposal was that the multi-sig can pause the stream in terms of abuse. But I think, yeah, like something pretty egregious has to happen for the community to rally around and make a specific snapshot for a proposal to stop streaming, as long as like if they could make the claim that they were within the parameters that they set out in the proposal and that was voted through, then there'd probably need to be a vote to turn it off again. And I think that would take quite a lot of political will to kind of get that through.
Do you think there'd be a movement towards like a intermediate grant committee that sits, to manage these grants? I mean, you look at something like Aave, which has like the Aave Chan is a foundation, and then also on Maker as well too. They have their own grant committee as well too. Some DAOs don't have it, like Curve and Frax, but others see the benefit of having like a intermediate institution, or not institution, but intermediate group that can like vet and work with projects before their proposals even get to the vote.
The problem with that for me would be, I mean, I think from a builder perspective, right? The truth is, having to go through this entire process every 3 months would be, it's going to cost a lot in terms of like team energy and all that kind of stuff. But so there could be like an upside to doing so. But the problem with a committee or something like that really is that, especially in a grant that is so far-reaching as this, right? Like Aave is just Aave, right? But Arbitrum is an entire chain. It has Aave on it, it has Lido on it, it has us on it, it has Perennial on it, it has everybody on it. With something so wide-reaching, I think the bias that each individual will have, and I think that there is such a bias for anybody who does care about Arbitrum. Everybody who will be on that grant team will probably have a bias, and there's going to be like a lot of, oh well, this person has XYZ. I don't know how Olympia put it in his post about Camelot, but like this sort of incentives towards other projects or other chains or whatever it may be, and those kind of things are just going to maybe create it's going to be a bit messy, right? So I don't really know who could be on that governance team that is going to satisfy everybody, but yeah, it would be a difficult thing to put in place, I think.
Yeah. So how does the oh yeah, no, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like a bit of a hard one, right? Like, everyone has some sort of implicit bias, but I think kind of what it boils down to is like, I mean, there's how many applications, I think like in 60 or something, asking for that 120 million ARB. And I think like voter apathy is going to be a hard one. You look at the snapshot proposal, there's actually 30,000 votes on that, which is pretty amazing. Great turnout. But I think the key thing is just for the community to delegate, like for anyone who's an ARB holder to go out and delegate their vote to somebody who aligns with their values. I think because, you know, for them, like going through every proposal is almost a job. You know, they're saying, hey, I'm a delegate. This is what I'm interested in, and I care about the ecosystem. And I don't think it's reasonable to ask, you know, 30,000 people to spend their time on the forum and do all of this type of stuff. And so I think, you know, when you look at like Optimism and how they kind of had that drive to delegate was that was quite successful. I think that Arbitrum should really push the similar thing in the sense that we should have delegates that, you know, everyone states their position and people delegate to, and then the voting process runs through like that. I think, you know, if you have these kind of not behind closed doors boards, or, you know, people whose job it is to do these kind of review committees and all this type of stuff, it can get a little bit murky, where in the end of the day it is the votes that control the DAO. So ideally, I think the power should be passed along, you know, through the delegate system into like a snapshot vote, rather than having kind of intermediate steps that filter, because, you know, as WenMoon said, everyone has a little bit of a bias. So yeah.
Yeah, it is tricky. I mean, whether you want to go the grants council route, which obviously Optimism has done, but you can see there is, yeah, as you say, like there's conflict of interest going on there, and some people may be getting hired for the job when they aren't even that necessarily aligned with the ecosystem. I'm not sure that would really happen with Arbitrum. I think on Arbitrum you probably got more of the issue on the buyer side, like as Louis said. But I mean, this is no like small feat to go through these proposals. I mean, we as a group have been doing it. We're about 50 through, like with full notes and full responses drafted, and I've got a team of, there's like 10 of us doing it. Like, it's not easy. And you know, at the end of the day, we're just doing it because we want to see Arbitrum move forward. But you're not going to get like necessarily voluntary good actors like doing this, as they said, every 3 months. Like, just as it takes away from builders and the time they could be writing code, like it takes away from, you know, everything else that, you know, other kind of market participants and ecosystem participants can be doing.
Yeah,
so I think that there needs to be some sort of incentivization in some way.
Yeah, these proposals are quite extensive when you look at them. I mean, they must have taken a long time to write for these teams. Jake in the chat asks about, I think you guys mentioned this, like delegates with voting, like an Optimism style RPGF's format. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, retro public goods funding is kind of where there's a bit of you know, ambiguity around this program in itself, because some people are trying to allocate capital and allocate ARB to push the environment forward over the next 3 months, and then you've probably got a whole nother swathe of delegates who are actually granting that ARB based on retrospective things. So maybe we do need a retroactive program as well, but we also need a forward-thinking program, you know, as this one's supposed to be.
Yeah. So just to run through the application timeline again, the deadline for applications was the 27th of September. That ended last week. Right now we're in the review period. The review period goes from the 28th until tomorrow on October 4th. And then voting period starts on October 5th, which is going to be Thursday, and it will continue until Thursday the week afterwards. So like, what is going on right now? I know that you guys mentioned some community calls.
Yeah, yesterday there was a pitching session that was organized by Stable Labs, which is actually a really good initiative. It's just like 5 minutes, basically just like a quick fire pitch of a TLDR of your proposal. Sort of got hijacked yesterday, but I think it'll get fired back up today. But yesterday there was like Frax and Gaines, Perennial, Jones DAO, all got to sort of shoot their shot, which was cool.
And then how will the voting work? Is it just a snapshot vote, or how's the voting going to be done for the wide amount of Arbitrum that needs to be distributed here?
This was a question that I had as well. I was kind of a little bit unsure about how it's going to work. I imagine it'll be a snapshot vote, but yeah, like going through the forum, it'll be all on day one, like, you know, like tens, 50, 60, 70 votes all happening at once, and you have to kind of run through the list with your Arbitrum and sign every single time, which will be kind of interesting. But yeah, I think it's going to be a bit of a process for those that are kind of have quite a lot of weight, and we'll be making sure they vote on every single one.
There was a good question from Jacob Phillips in the comments, and I think you've already addressed this to some degree, but just generally, what do you think that the team could improve in the peer review process, like in terms of balancing speed and efficiency?
Like I think Atomist. Look, Atomist and Castle Cap, they have a team of 10, and the end date is tomorrow. And I think you said that you're only 50 deep out of 100, right?
Yeah, that's it.
So either you've got to do 50 in a day with a team of 10, or like, I don't know, right? So already it looks like genuinely, I feel sorry for you guys are a team of 10, but I feel sorry for the individual delegates, right? And there are quite a few of them. How are they going to be able to read each and every one of these and actually put some decent thought into this? And if a vote really does come about, the truth is they're going to have to kind of rush their kind of their feedback. In this case, obviously, I think the next phase is the feedback phase, but whatever it is, right? It's going to take quite a lot of time to get some of this stuff out. So it's either it could have been a longer process, or maybe it could have limited in terms of what people sent, because some proposals are extremely long, right? Far too long, in my opinion, to a point where, but it also makes sense from the protocol side, right? You want to not only explain what your protocol does, but you're essentially pitching why you should get this. And you should take all the time you have. You should take as much space as you possibly can. And so yeah, it's just a lot of work, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to imagine these individual delegates just sort of doing it, right? It's near impossible, and each proposal needs north of 71 million Arbitrum to actually pass to get your grant. So yeah, it does sort of seem like it will go down that path of a popularity contest, because I don't know, if you were an unknown protocol, how are you really going to get the attention of I don't know, just the major delegates, like the Eric Walls of the world, or the Chainlink gods, or whoever else on the Arbitrum forums. But yeah, I hope that they can sort of be distributed sort of throughout the proposals.
Talk about that more.
It's going to be hard.
What's quorum again?
71 or something, I think.
Yeah,
for each proposal.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
So for the proposal to be valid, it needs to get 71 million and 50% positive, which in my mind is that's the 71 million is the hurdle, right? I think voter apathy might be more of a problem than people voting in favor of your
wait, can you hold on before we get here? Can we talk about how the voting is going to go? Is it individual votes for each proposal, or how is the voting done here? Because I'm a little bit confused on that.
I don't think anyone's that clear, but I mean, it must be. They can't put 100 plus options in one vote. So, well,
I think
and
both sides
matrix of possibilities.
Putting it either way kind of seems insane, right? One vote with 100 different options, or 100 different votes. They both sound pretty insane. So I have no clue, which is why it's going to be very interesting to see.
Because you could I guess you could see something like a gauge system where you just have everything that's available, right? And there is no quorum, and you just vote for whatever you think is interesting by percentage of how you want your voting power to be broken down. I mean, are there minimums? So when you look at the grant proposals, if you pass, is there a minimum that you would receive for the incentives?
I think the way that T Norm mentioned it on the forum, I think yesterday or the day before, was that it'll go by weight, by amount of votes. So say like you look at like I think it's like top 8 asks, top 8 proposal size. That accounts for the whole program, right? And if you imagine them being maybe the most popular, if you weight how much they're asking to how popular generally they are, then maybe only 8 people get funded. Because they have the most votes on their proposals. So it doesn't matter if all 100 pass, only the ones that have the highest amount of votes, like going from the top down, will receive the tokens. So you'd hope that there was a situation where, it's not just the top end that the top 8 that get the whole allocation. You hope that some in the middle pack would get some and some at the bottom as well. But I think this is kind of, again, going back to this is a test. This is the first time that this has happened. And, by designing it in such a way, you're getting an outcome that was kind of almost predestined, right? You have a large ecosystem, you have a small amount of tokens, and this is the result. So maybe in the future, it's a bit more targeted. Maybe there's seasons, maybe it's, split up in a lottery system or something, but who knows? I think really what's just going to happen is whatever happens, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I think as we move forward, and if we have another one of these, like everyone will be more efficient. I think no one had the ability to even build a framework of what it looked like, of who you would allocate to, and suddenly you're slapped in the face with 100 plus proposals. We've obviously got through some sort of stage of building a framework and trying scoring things objectively, as well as obviously all the subjective things that come with it. So I think we'd be much more ready to attack it if we knew there was 100 coming in. When I started doing it, there was 5, and then so the workflow I built was not necessarily made for what actually happened in the end.
Yeah.
I have another small angle to talk about. Do you think that basically everyone just, or most people just got too much? I mean, not got too much, just ask for too much. Like, are most requests just too big? Or is it just negotiation? How do you guys see that?
I think to me,
there's 12.5 million
Yeah.
sorry, if there's 120 million for 50, the answer is of course somebody's asking for too much, right?
For sure.
Is
Is it everybody, or is it most, or how do you see it? Like, and also, is it mostly strategy? Is it negotiation? How do?
I don't know. Like, I think if you look at like the asks, right? Like, first off, it's kind of the framework. There was the different vote categories, and they were laid out assuming a certain amount of people would apply, and kind of I think they've had more than expected. But there was no cap on the largest tier. The largest tier was 2 million and above, so you can just kind of ask what you want them, and that's kind of what we've seen, right? We've got from GMX, I think they had 12, and then next one down is Marks, and it kind of continues in that fashion. Maybe limiting the top end would be nice as it distributes further down the chain, but I think like, again, it's a test, and we'll see what the outcome is. But I think it would be interesting to see what it would look like if a lot more protocols got the incentives, like as in like a wider range of protocols had incentives running through them, and see what that activates within the ecosystem, and how liquidity flows and things like that. That would be an interesting experiment. But I think this is, from my view, it's kind of built to support the larger players from how it's been structured. So yeah.
Well, we will see a quick vote. So after the on-chain voting period is done on the 11th of October, the new application period starts just a day later, it looks like, on the 12th of October for round 2, and that will finish up in November 9th. So lessons learned during this period can be applied to the next one, which I'm sure will happen.
If there's any ARB left.
Yeah, if there's any ARB left, right. I mean, there should be. I mean, if in theory the voters, should be looking at this and saying like, oh, hey, we have round 2 coming up. And maybe in round 2, we if we're like very heavy towards voting for incumbents and the protocols with higher TVL and more dominant market share, maybe we should focus on smaller protocols next time and see how that goes.
I mean, the optimist in me wants to see that happen, but the pessimist in me is probably thinking that we'll get it all done in this round, and yeah, we'll have to wait till the next one for everyone else to kind of have their shot. As it will probably be a more nuanced program.
You mean for application round 2 or for like the next season of Arbitrum grants?
Next season. I mean, I think as it is, the community voted this through, and I think that there'll be an outcome. But I guess this is data to be able to tune the program and go from there. Cool.
Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up on. We've gotten to the top of the hour, and I want to make sure not to keep everybody here for hours on end. I want to thank everybody that's been watching this. We had a huge amount of people that tuned in today. I think we set a record with 30. It's really interesting how this Arbitrum incentive program is going to play out, and we will find out. Probably have another show next week once the voting is wrapped up, so we can talk about the outcomes and who are the big winners and losers. But it does look like there is a lot to work through on this program and a lot to iterate on, and it's just the first one, and so a lot to learn. So WenMoon already dropped off, so Wen, thank you for being here. But Louis and AJ, also thanks for being here as well too. Adamus, do you guys want to, AJ and Louis, do you want to talk about Perennial again before we head out? Are they here? I think they dropped out or something. Adamus, do you want to talk about Castle Capital and what you guys are doing?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks everyone for joining today. Come have a look at us on Twitter, castle__cap. We are, quite a multifaceted group of about 50 guys and gals, doing things within the crypto space, mainly in DeFi, and the majority of us bridging to Arbitrum on day one and been there for a while. So we're very involved in Arbitrum governance. We do a lot of open public research, and we write a weekly newsletter. And we also have a business arm which provides consultancy services and advisory services to teams building in the space. So do hit us up. We're constantly generating content and looking for new gigabrains to come and join the ranks.
Yeah, sorry, Sam. I was still here, but I was just getting kicked out of SmartCon. But yeah, it's basically like Perennial. We're targeting to launch our V2 tomorrow. We've sort of like deployed it on Arbitrum at the moment, so would love to see some of you out there trying it out. We're just onboarding LPs at the moment, but our team is sort of ex Coinbase engineers, some Polychain VCs. Louis did some work at like Gearbox and some other DeFi protocols. I used to be in like the infrastructure side of DeFi more so, hence being here at Chainlink at SmartCon at the moment. But yeah, you can find us on Twitter, jump in the Discord. Thanks for having us on, guys. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Stream.
Yeah. And we'll probably have to have you back on for your V2 launch to talk about Perennial in full. Castle, Adamus, I really enjoyed the thread you guys had on the XCRC20 token today. So everybody go check that out. We'll have links in the show notes and down in the YouTube description. Thanks everybody for being here. Garrett, DeFi Advisor, as always.
Thanks, pleasure.
And
thanks a lot, sir. It was really great. Really enjoyed your moderation, and I really think we had a very good discussion. And I definitely think the audience really liked it today. And thanks for everyone for their time. For sure, it was really a lot of fun today.
Yeah, I learned.
Great to have you guys on. Really, I really enjoyed. I was quiet, but I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, hopefully everybody learned something at home. I learned a ton. Adamus and AJ, you guys were great. And
I gotta go watch this one again. Actually,
yeah, exactly. We'll be clipping some stuff out of here. So we'll see you again next week to talk about Arbitrum, and then tomorrow as well too. So thanks everybody. See you.